Uh, okay, so we're going to hear from two of our star people, Susan Kang and Jennifer Gabori. That will be part one. And part two, we have Michael Foley as usual, but Donna Costa is going to talk to us about some changes in part D. So I have 1:03 p.m. I'm going to start. We just hit 100 participants. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our December 2024 chapter meeting. My name is Ann Friedman. I'm the chair of the chapter. And also with us, as always, is our Diane Mena, the vice chair, and Bonnie Nelson, our secretary. And we work together to try to run an efficient chapter. The topic is in two parts. First, we'll hear reflections on the elections. I hope we can handle that. There's been so much talk about the election. But Susan Kang and Jen Gabori are going to, I think, point out some interesting stuff. So I thought we'd start with Susan, but I'm told that the two of them are going to kind of back and forth, and that's fine. Susan Kang is an associate professor of political science at John Jay College, and she's a member of the PSC Executive Council. She's volunteered in many state and local electoral and issue campaigns through her work with the PSC and the New York City Democratic Socialists of America and other progressive groups. Susan has to leave about 1:40 or thereabouts. She's got commitments at the college. Jen Gabori is our new PSC first vice president, and she has also served since 2019 as the union's chapter chair at Hunter College, where she is a lecturer in the Department of Women and Gender Studies, and she's on an adjunct conversion line. Thanks to Blanca Vasquez from our EC, who will be taking notes, and to Ava Farkas, who will be staffing the meeting. So I think we're ready to go. Susan, you going to start?
Yeah, happy to start. And like my colleague Jen, fellow political scientist, is welcome to jump in at any time. And so I don't really like being introduced as a star. I think everybody in the union, especially active members, is a star. But I'm happy to talk to you about my thoughts about the election today. And with the proviso that what we think about the election kind of changes day by day. Okay, so a couple things to think about. I guess first thing is from my perspective as a political scientist, but one that does not have expertise in American politics, is that the Trump administration, upcoming Trump administration, and sort of the movement behind him is very ambitious. They want to restructure the federal government and change and create new incentives for state and local governments according to their sort of master strategy, which many of you are probably familiar with, which is typically called Vision 2025. And this is sort of like a radical re-envisioning of American politics and society that ranges from things like disliking diversity type initiatives to changing the way that government programs are funded, and then included in that, but not, I'm not sure if it's in the Vision 2025, is like a radical restructuring of our economic policies when it comes to trade. So if you're like me and you're observing and you're a little bit like worried, there's a couple things that kind of come to mind. The first one is I have been thinking about what it must have been like to be vaguely a trade unionist in London, UK, during the Thatcher period. She seemed to be invincible. She seemed to be able to crush strike after strike. And basically, I've spoken to people who were on the left in the UK during that time, and they had nothing good to say, except that when the poll tax came around, which was sort of like this really regressive thing that was required for all Brits to pay. I think that like the conservative government didn't understand the way that people would revolt against this. And this led to like a mass civil disobedience in which people who were not politicized before basically refused to pay. And it took down the Thatcher government. So right now it feels like very hopeless and scary, perhaps, and very uncertain. But one of the things that I think to keep in mind, and like I'm from South Korea, where a president was removed not many years ago, maybe like in the past 5 years, because of mass protest in the street, is that although the conditions are not in our favor, nothing is overdetermined, right? So the ability of people to protest, to reject, to engage in mass civil disobedience or mobilization is always powerful. So even though we know what they want to do, I still think that it is not time for despair, but rather to look for moments of opportunity and to see past examples in which Republicans have tried to radically reformulate and change, things that like Medicare that are very, very important to so many Americans, and failed, right? So for example, George W. Bush in his second term also tried to radically change many social programs and he failed, right? And many of the things he'd hoped to do, he failed at doing, whether also Trump tried to radically change the American Affordable Care Act, also failed in most regards in that way because people did not allow their elected representatives to allow these things to happen. So one of the things that we can hopefully have some faith in is that despite how discouraging it looks, American people still have the ability to hold their elected leaders accountable, and to say, no, you can't cut programs that our people, our communities, our family members rely on. I'm reminded of the images of people like going after Republican Congress members in the first couple of years of the Trump administration, basically saying, we're going to destroy you if you allow for significant changes to the ACA. Okay, so I want to start on the most hopeful note possible, which is that, even if the Republicans have a trifecta, there's a lot of things about the US government that are very deliberately created to make those kinds of changes slow and deliberate, although we are operating under new conditions, but, they're still there. Okay, so I would like to hear from my colleague, Jen, if she has anything to say, but there's a couple of things to talk about that I wanted to speak about, which was federal funding to both state and local governments, as well as to higher education. So I read somewhere that federal funding, whether direct or indirect through things like Pell Grants, makes up about 7% of CUNY's budget. And I know that many students get the full amount of Pell Grants to help to pay for their access to CUNY, and those who don't get a lot of money through tuition assistance through the state. And so as funding from the federal government to states is also affected, that will also influence available funding for TAP. And these are all things that, we have to fight against, that we can, let our elected representatives know they need to fight against, and that because these are such essential lifelines into CUNY and higher education in general, and to make higher education accessible to, everybody who wants it. Another thing to keep in mind too is that if you are somebody who does research, right? I know some retirees are still very research active. There may be changes when it comes to federal funders, right? We may see Trump values affecting like existing grants, for example. So at my institution at John Jay, there's a lot of sort of equity and diversity oriented research that's funded by, National Science Foundation, Social Science Research Council. That money may end up drying up like mid-award, depending on what kinds of administrators come in. There's a lot of things that like the Trump administration can control just by being very slow. We're going to expect to see some exodus of civil servant workers, lifelong civil service workers from federal agencies who don't want to work under Trump. And that's a reality. So these are things to sort of keep in mind. Hopefully try to get the funding, realize that funding structures will change, and that our ability to work with the federal government or, do collaborative things. Like my institution used to do work with the State Department, just like to get students involved in research. We didn't do any of that during the Trump administration because that wasn't a priority. So those things definitely shifted. So those are other things to consider as well. In addition to the kinds of calls for research will probably change. We can expect to see more stuff geared towards career readiness. The joke I like to tell my students about career readiness is I'm ready to help them get a career in academia or food service because that's where my expertise lies. And that's like a push that's been happening for a long time. Republicans and sort of like conservative Democrats have been trying to get higher education to justify its existence based on like measures of economic impact and sort of like direct job placement. And so I imagine that there'll be more incentives for institutions of higher education to shift towards those goals as well. And then of course there's, direct money that comes from the federal government for both state and city services. We're unclear the way that things like Medicaid expansion will be affected. So one of the things from the department of the Vision 2025 was ending the Department of Education, right? So that is a huge federal agency, and that includes all of the like federal financial aid for colleges is housed within the Department of Education, but also lots of other things are there too. Like, so one of my friends, a union sibling of mine in the UFT, does federally funded work as a occupational therapist for children with disabilities in DOE. So it's unclear if that money will continue, if that money will be resent to states for states to manage that money instead of directly coming from the Department of Education and getting paid to the Department of Education here in New York City. There's a lot of things that are up in the air. And those things are all kind of mandated under the American with Disabilities Act. But I imagine that would also affect some of the accessibility for students at CUNY as well. So there's these questions that remain unclear. Okay, so at the state and city level, it's kind of disappointing to see the way in which Governor Hochul has not taken a stance as strong as Governor Newsom, for example, in saying that like New York State will be like a blue like firewall against Trump policies. That really hasn't been communicated, nor has our mayor really made these kinds of overtures. It doesn't mean that we cannot pressure them. We cannot call and demand these things. And I think it's up to us as citizens of New York State and New York City to make the demands of what we want to see from our local leadership. We are seeing calls for more progressive taxation within New York State to fill in some of these revenue gaps that might emerge. I think I read something like if New York State was an independent country, we'd be like the 12th or 13th biggest economy in the world. We have the wealth, we just don't tax it that much. And so I think that there might be more political support for more progressive taxation to fulfill that sort of federal gap. In addition, it'll be interesting to see the way that not just New York State, but other states sort of respond to these funding, I guess, gaps. We're also curious, those of us who work on state and city budgets, the city budget typically is passed in June, the state budget is typically passed, constitutionally meant to be passed by April 1st. We don't know when the federal budget will be passed. We don't know to what extent, like I said, the only thing that stops the federal budget from just following a Trump line is going to be grassroots pressure against, Republican Congress and senators in sort of swingy districts. I think that there's going to be room for those of us who don't live in these areas to make phone calls, to engage in outreach, to really educate people. Maybe the AFT will run the kind of phone banks that we ran during the election to reach out to siblings, union siblings in other places to talk about the importance of continued advocacy. But I imagine that there's going to be creative ways to address these vulnerabilities. Okay, that's all I have for now. Happy to take any questions, or if my colleague Jen Gabori wants to add anything.
Hi, Jen. You have to unmute.
Hey there. So I was typing in some links to share with folks while I was getting ready. Wasn't unmuting. Let me put these in the chat now so folks can take a look at them while I'm speaking. Here we go. I've identified, there's 4 links I put in the chat. No need to look at them now. I can also save them for later. I'm also happy to send them around, and they're not also essential to what I'm talking about. So let me back up a little bit from where Susan kind of landed, and also then pick up on some of the themes that she talked about, and then maybe we can just open it up for discussion and questions. So, and we want to leave like plenty of time for that and make sure we do that while Susan's here. Okay, so I want to go back to a little bit further. Well, Susan went back to Thatcher. So I want to go back. I want to go back just to election night, and look kind of forward a little bit in terms of where we are, and think about like what kind of does this moment mean. As some folks already know, and as has been reported in the news, you know, Steve Romaluski and others here in the Kinney mapping service who were able to join us at our last legislative committee meeting, which was terrific that they were there, by the way, and we opened that meeting up to all members. Steve was able to walk us through what demographics, what are the demographic shifts that they're looking at, and what are the voting changes that happened in the last election compared to when Joe Biden was elected. And as I'm sure folks here know, or many folks here know, it is just shy of 600,000 Democrats or registered voters who voted for Biden, but did not vote for Harris this time around. So 600,000. So one of the things to talk about when we think about the narrative around Trump's gaining ground in New York City in particular, the thing to note is that it's because people stayed home. So Trump, for example, picked up 95,000 votes in New York City. And for example, something like Staten Island, which we're interested in, like picked up 10,000 votes. So it was not that, and 95,000 votes in the context of New York City is, you know, it's significant to look at, but it is not like the sort of crushing wave of 600,000 people staying home. And that the staying homeness is something that I want us to really be mulling over. That is, I think, different than some of the other kinds of concerns, right, that we have heard in the election. So one of the courses I teach 2 classes that are kind of relevant to some of the things we're talking about. I teach a class on masculinities, and I teach a class on white supremacy. And so, you know, I'm following issues around kind of the multicultural right. And one of the links I put into the chat is a conversation from the podcast Code Switch that had the journalist from the New York Times, Ested Herndon, on, who has a great podcast called The Run Up. And he did a piece right just a couple weeks ago on his podcast. And then they talked about it in the last few days on Code Switch, where he was reflecting kind of with his own family in Chicago and other people that he knew on what it meant for Black people to have a kind of coalition of people of color kind of fall apart. And like poking at kind of like what was true about that and what was not true about that. And for sure, some of the things that we know out of this election, right, those are some of the things, as we know, those are some of the things that will continue to kind of resonate. Then with that in mind, we think about not only the kind of gains that we had in the House seats, right? New York State, we picked up 3 House seats, okay, and then defended Tom Suozzi's seat. And, you know, in 2 years from now, things could look very different in the midterms, as we learned, right, last time around, kind of like in the Trump cycle. Like, so we don't necessarily even have to wait for the kind of like Thatcher repudiation necessarily to sort of see like, will we get kind of like a shift, right, and will we get a kind of like referendum on Trump? We may get to see that in 2 years if Congress, for example, flips. And the New York seats could end up being integral to that or not, right? So that's definitely one of the questions, right, that we see on the table. I live in Southern Brooklyn, so I live in a very kind of red-purple zone, right? That where the gains that were made in the state legislature had a significant impact on the neighborhood in which I live, and which we constantly still have. Kind of like every election is a battleground election. All the elections are won within 1,200 votes. And if you do not go out there and knock doors and pound the pavement, you lose. And in fact, Chris McCrate, who was a challenger to homophobe and sort of like drunken, incompetent assembly member Albert Krasny, and I went to in a kind of Asian majority district for the Senate, they lost their races. And those races for McCrate and Chu were some of the kind of priority races for a bunch of different people, including the Working Family Party and others. And so, right, part of what we want to look at and what like the CUNY mapping service is going to help us understand later when they have the voter file info and can generate more information on demographics and voter turnout, like in a couple months, we'll be able to look back at some of those districts and look more around the city and learn more about what are some of the lessons and things here. To go back to a few of the other kinds of things Susan Wright said, and tie it into some of the things that are happening right within the union. So Susan talked, pointed it, for example, at the sort of like potential impact of the loss or shifts or even threats to Pell Grants. So the work that is happening, some of the work that's happening formally within the union is to reactivate some of the immigrant defense committees, which traveled under a few different names, and some of them had campus incarnations and some of them had a PSC standing committee. And that committee is going to reactivate. And a few different people, including someone no less than Barbara Bowen, is interested in potentially getting involved and helping lead some of that kind of immigrant defense CUNY work. James Davis has already talked to the folks at CUNY Clear. We've been reaching out to sort of like immigrant community groups, including, our friends at New York Immigration Coalition, Make the Road, and others. And we're contemplating some town hall work, some coalition meetings that are going to be about not only kind of like work in communities where folks live or where we all live around immigrant defense, but specifically immigrant defense at CUNY. And that gets to part of what Susan said. Conversation is bubbling up among both college students in different, currently enrolled college students, but also importantly, prospective college students who are in mixed status immigration households. So for example, the students, right, like the high school students or the college students might be documented students, and then you might have family members living in the household that are undocumented. And so with that mixed status household, they are particularly vulnerable because they may have a bunch of information that is out there circulating because they have legal documented members of their household, right? And this is something that we saw, right, in 2016, 2017. And then one of the questions in front of those students is whether or not they apply to Pell in this new environment. And I'm really, really hoping that, the new DOE chancellor and others are able to kind of weigh in and potentially calm the waters. But frankly, we're still waiting for information to see how far and how fast and if and when the Trump administration actually sort of like follows through on some of those threats, right? Both about the kind of like dismantling or threatening of Pell, but also the use of Pell and other kinds of like tools to get at immigrants, right? And those are going to be some of the kinds of questions, right, that are in front of us. And also like both the sort of fiscal piece for students and the money that comes into students, but also something that could generate an enrollment crisis, right? We are just climbing back, right, at many colleges into much more stable enrollment, right? And this is something that could potentially destabilize CUNY, right, in that way around some of those kinds of ways in which it could disrupt enrollment, right? So that's a significant problem. One of the other things Susan said that is important, right, is of course how we all are feeling about state and local governments in terms of budgets. One of the links I shared, in fact, it was the first link I started with when I was collecting links for this meeting just a few minutes ago. There's a story that came out at 6 a.m. this morning that is on the kind of robust budget spending. I thought this was an interesting story from both what people are anticipating from both Hochul and Adams. And the city had a story about this, was that not only about the kind of like solid collection of tax receipts, which we knew was happening, and the comptrollers the last few years have been telling us is happening, but oh, lo and behold, the governor and the mayor are deciding that yes, that's true. Now that's particularly sort of like well-timed if Eric Adams hopes to sort of kind of stay in office or like eke it out. and that many people have been saying that this would be kind of a make it rain year in the city for a while because he had sort of like pooled some cash together. But that may be true for Hochul as well, who's not doing so well in terms of like, in terms of like where we are with public opinion. We had the NYSET president recently tell us that we may be pleasantly surprised about where Hochul lands on kind of like what she offers to New York State public higher ed. So we'll see, right? I mean, I thought this story was a good indicator. And we're obviously in the middle of like dealing with the contract and Hochul and are watching some of the kinds of budget indicators on their willingness to kind of like spend money this year very keenly. But, I was a little bit heartened by that story, but of course, these are sort of like nervous times. All right, I want to shift in the last thing and then I want to stop. So, and maybe Susan also may want to come back in on this, either in question and answer or in like closing kind of remarks. So as you know, we are hurtling into a kind of mayoral election. And the thing I want to say about the mayoral election is less some of the kinds of things about ranked choice voting and process, although there will be those conversations. And I would say that for folks who are interested in it, there is already the kind of like stakes being laid out, as many folks know here, to kind of have a progressive ranking vote that uses ranked choice voting to say, don't rank, do not rank Adams, do not rank Cuomo. And like have real explainers going out to people that will be our actual kind of use of ranked choice voting in that way to expressly say, don't rank, right? And for those of you who follow some of this, like that's how San Francisco, for example, ended up with a progressive mayor when the politics in the city were not necessarily going that direction because of a kind of ranked choice voting strategy that said, don't rank these other people from another coalition bloc. And we could end up emulating some of that. I wanted to highlight this set of issues. So some of us within the PSC have been having conversations in a preliminary way with some of the mayoral hopefuls about healthcare politics in particular, a subject that is, of course, near and dear to this committee. And we are talking both about kind of like not only coming off of the campaign to defend traditional Medicare, that of course folks in this room and the PSC played a central role in, but also in the context of active healthcare where GHI is up for bid. And some of the things that we have found in those conversations with the more left and progressive wing of those candidates so far has been some pretty heartening things in terms of not only respect for what we did around Medicare, which is why I think many of those people are having those conversations with us, but also around real opportunities to think more radically or in more compelling new ways about like what are the opportunities for health insurance for active municipal workers. And like, could we be doing things like self-insurance? Could we be doing things like building our own health clinics as municipal workers? Could we be using H&H system, the H&H Health and Hospital system to be treating more CUNY students and CUNY families? That is something that I took to the Vice Chancellor as a suggestion. For some of you who know, at Hunter, the Brookdale campus is about to be leveled and rebuilt as a kind of like mixed space that has like science centers, and we're going to share space with a bunch of other entities. And one of those other entities is H&H. It has a hospital unit right there. It's right by Bellevue, and it's going to expand. And I had said to Hector, hey, that H&H should have a clinic, and it should see CUNY workers and CUNY students, and it should be a health clinic. We don't have a health clinic. Like there's lots of different ways in which we can use and will be using, right, the mayoral race for lots of different kinds of ideas that sort of run through CUNY and the sort of like fabric of the larger city to advance many of the politics that, we want to see. Susan, do you want to say anything about that and then open it up for a discussion? Or should we just go to discussion?
I think that I would really recommend that everybody who's interested participate in this process with the Ledge Committee, because we do have freedom as the PSC to make our own endorsements, that we should be bold. I think that one of the things that I would take away from 2024's presidential election is that without a proper, like, real left contender, there's no real incentive for candidates to speak to left issues. And I think the difference in 2020, Biden was much more to the left of Kamala Harris. And that's not like a personal thing. I think it just reflects the fact that there was a credible threat from someone like Bernie Sanders. And so I think that it's a great time to look at sort of the more transformative and radical candidates who are running in local races. I guess that's my 2 cents. And then I can hang on for like a little bit longer to 140 because it's just a department meeting. So I feel like I can slide in 5 minutes late, but not more than that. So happy to take questions for either of us.
And as I just said in the chat, because she didn't say it, I really want to encourage people to listen to Susan Kang's podcast, Left Unread. It's terrific.
Thank you. Lots to think about. Okay. Questions? Impossible. Come on, mighty retirees. Okay, Erwin Yelowitz.
Okay, I'd like your opinion on the question of why Trump won the election. It's been speculated that he won because of a very deep malaise in the electorate that is directed at incumbents wherever they happen to fall. If you go back to 2016, you see that Hillary Clinton was linked to Obama and lost. And Trump's first midterm, he lost. Then Trump himself was the incumbent in 2020, and he lost. And Biden's midterm went against him in 2022. And then in 2024, the Biden-Harris connection lost. So my question is, are we looking at really a development where the public is so turned off on politics that they will vote against the incumbent, no matter who the incumbent is and what the incumbent may stand for, and that the victory of Trump was not so much a victory of Trump's policies as it was a repudiation of the incumbents who happened to be there?
I mean, I think that's a great observation. You got to remember that I'm not a stats person. The difference in terms of the votes was still within the margin of error. We can't really say that there's an overwhelming like mandate for Trump, no matter what he says. You know, the percentage difference between their votes is quite small, even if the electoral college differences are quite large. So I think that there's probably a lot of truth to that. We do know that millions of people who voted for Biden probably stayed home this time around. So I do think that there is some truth, and survey data shows this, that confidence in democratic institutions in the US is at an all-time low. And we can speculate why. You know, I voted, in the election, and I don't love our public institutions, but then again, I am a political scientist. And, for all kinds of reasons, I think the key thing is not to demonize anybody and to act like people are not organizable or convincible, no matter who they voted for. There's a kind of kind of reactionary, like a liberal reactionary sentiment. Let's say, these people are just racist and sexist, so we can dismiss them. I think I've seen this online. People are like, oh, the tiger ate my face or something. We should not be happy that some people will suffer, and they voted for Trump. Like, everybody deserves like dignity and human rights and, all the things that we all deserve. So I think the key thing is to approach folks who've made a support Trump as regular folks who, we don't agree with the way they voted. I still think that they should have healthcare and Medicare and, their Social Security defended, right?
Okay, thank you. Glenn Kissick.
Yeah, hi. Thanks to the presenters. I was reading an article by Doug Henwood, and he mentioned that when they did the exit polls, when they asked people, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, a quarter said they were. And they went for Harris by 68 points. Almost twice as many, 46%, said they were not. and they went for Trump by 64 points, which accounted for almost 3/4 of his vote. So it seems to me this election was people registering their disapproval of how their lives were going. And I was a little surprised at the lack of criticism of Harris. I mean, Bernie Sanders, and unfortunately, it was right after the election, but he wrote this article for the Boston Globe in which he said, look, the working class might have abandoned the Democratic Party, but that's only because the Democratic Party abandoned the working class first through decades of neoliberal policies, austerity. I mean, look at Andrew Cuomo for and he's the Democratic Party, right? So during the campaign, Harris barely mentioned raising the federal minimum wage. She didn't support Medicare for all. She didn't support a tax on the windfall profits that corporations made during the pandemic. She didn't support Bernie Sanders' plan to tax the billionaires like Elon Musk. But she did support one thing. She supported having the most lethal military in the world. And those of us who grew up during the Vietnam period and the Iraq period and the Afghanistan period, we don't want the most lethal military in the world. Okay, we don't want nearly $1 trillion of tax money being spent on the military when it could be spent on CUNY and public schools and lots of other worthy causes. So my question is, how do we continue to support a party that is a status quo, I would say bourgeois party, that is not interested in changing the status quo by very much?
So Susan has an answer to this, and I have an answer to this, and like our answers overlap in a Venn diagram. My answer is the answer that my teacher, Angela Davis, gave, which is that on election day, you choose your opponent. And, this is what we have to contend with. And I know, I know why I register as a Democrat in order to vote in the primary in New York City. I know it in terms of like being able to elect the people in our state legislature, because I have the opportunity to fund CUNY through that venue. I have the opportunity to move people through that direction. Not everyone will agree with that, and I also pay my DSA dues, right? So like, I know not everyone will agree with that. I know that we will all come at this. Many of us will come at this from kind of like different political vectors with different kind of commitments. But I would rather be inside the game than out of the game and ready to brawl. That is my answer.
I mean, I agree with your analysis completely. It's just that my conclusions are a bit different because, as Mark said, men make their own history, but not under the conditions of their own choosing. We don't live in a system where, minor party votes translate into anything, really. I always vote on the Working Families Party line because I want them to get the votes, even though I don't like the candidates I'm voting for. And so if we lived in a different system, I would be building that working class party with you. But unfortunately, we live in a single member, first past the post, geographically defined congressional system. And so we don't have that. I know in other like municipalities, they have proportional representation, and there you're able to get more radical candidates and parties to get more play. We don't live in that. And so perhaps we can have discussions about building, new forms of, but that's why like I'm in the DSA, because we use the Democratic Party line strategically. We certainly don't think that they're our friends. And I've never liked a single presidential candidate I've ever voted for. I've only been angry the day I voted. And perhaps you feel the same.
Thank you. Jessica Siegel.
Hi, I wanted to get back to the issues about immigration and immigrants, because Trump has said 1,000,000 times that day one they're going to start the process of gathering up immigrants, and we know Stephen Miller's in charge. So, Jen, I think you mentioned something about what the PSC is planning on doing. You mentioned also that Pell Grants are a way to document mixed families. Maybe you can talk about that more, but I would definitely be willing to be involved in a PSA push to do something about it, because, as anybody who works at CUNY, you look at our student body, that's who we're talking about, mixed families. So I guess the question is, talk about a little bit more about what the PSC is planning on doing, and also that question about, are you suggesting that students should not sign up for Pell Grants?
So
Is that-
we're waiting, we're kind of like watching to see what's happening and trying to assess right now and take cues from kind of evolving on the go kind of analysis right now of like vulnerabilities of people, right? I mean, like Trump has not yet taken office. We don't know exactly how things are going to unfold, but we already see people working on like some of these questions. And like how we allocate money through, you know, to undocumented students and families through TAP is very different than like what the information that's going to go through a FAFSA, right, to the federal government. I mean, that's basically the fear, right? That a family is going to fill out a FAFSA, including with parent information in it, because that is what is required unless a student goes through the kind of like difficult process often of declaring themselves independent, which is something that like, you know, committees could help students do. Like that is a process that people could be actively involved, like helping the students declare themselves as independents. But right, those are definitely things that we are going to be like waiting and seeing what we can do. And one of the other links that I put into the chat, right, was like, and a lot of these things are circulating around. It has to do with what Susan said as well, like where the kind of like state legislature and city council can take action, right, in kind of either emergency session, right, or actively when they formally come back to convene, will also be something that we're kind of like watching to see what's happening. I mean, we don't have any control, obviously, over Pell Grants, but there are some other ways in which we can look at kind of like protecting people. And so that is absolutely a vulnerability for people. And in following what people are saying in the chat, like we are going to want everyone who wants to, right, to do immigrant defense work. I put my email into the chat and I'll put it there a few more times before the end of the meeting. Please feel free to contact me about any of the things that we're talking about immigrant defense work or about getting involved with the legislative work right through the PSC. I always find that especially when it comes to city council screening as for sure, like we always get the most people for whatever reason, we get the most people for city council screenings more than any other kinds of people, including like state races for legislature, even though for CUNY state legislature money is like where it's at, like in terms of the core money. But we want to pull in people on all these kinds of like races, including work around the mayor's race. And we are already prepping screening documents now. That work is going to begin formally in December and go over into January, February, March. And so if you want to be involved in, I'll put it my PSC email again in the chat. If you have interest in being involved, I mean, we'll have lots of different times to collect this information, but if you want to be involved in some of the kinds of like things that have to do with PSC endorsements or PSC legislative work, mayor's race, state ledge races, city council races, and others, please email me. And if you want to also be involved in some of the immigrant defense work, please email me. And there's other things that we are going to be doing. We're going to be doing things on academic freedom, something we have not talked about here. We're going to be doing some things on, we're going to be having some other kinds of like town halls and other work kind of like directly tied to like different constituencies that may be attacked, including LGBTQ and trans folks. There's a lot of things that we are going to need to be doing that are going to involve being at CUNY and beyond CUNY in terms of like defense of particularly vulnerable people. I'll stop talking.
Okay. Mike Frank.
Thank you for the presentations, both of you. I'm going to go back to the larger question that people have been asking in various ways. It's clear that the degree of discontent in this country is large, right? Enormous. And someone characterized the election as those who voted for Harris voted for the status quo. Those who voted for Trump voted for change, right? And that was a striking, to me, a striking way to frame it. 40% of the Teamster members went for Trump, according to polls, right? 40%. So there's a tremendous erosion among organized labor, or at least the ranks, for support for the Democratic Party. So my question is, given all that, will continuing to support the continuing to vote Democratic and support the Democratic Party stop or slow down this shift to the right? Or, provocatively, will it strengthen that shift? That's it.
I'm not 100% sure what the question is asking, but I think I'll try to respond to it anyway. There's nothing overdetermined about the way the Democratic Party will respond to the way that, Trump has won, right? So both like moderate, pro-market, and more left and progressive sides of the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party is not a monolith, it's a coalition, right? Of lots of different social movements and communities and organizations and interests that it's like a Frankenstein, right? Of a coalition of people who vote a particular way. Each side is going to try to make their argument, right? Including, I've seen people saying on Twitter and the news, we have to be more moderate, the age of progressivism in the Democratic Party is over. And I've seen the opposite happen, including relatively moderate, there's a senator from Connecticut who said something like, we need to adopt more politics of Bernie Sanders. So there's nothing overdetermined about how the Democratic Party decides. That is currently being decided right now. And it's being decided in various talking heads circles and on editorial board pages and in the fight over the DNC chair. And so I think that the Democratic Party is not, we don't follow the Democratic Party because they're not the people who save us, right? We are the people who save us, right? It's like grassroots union members and social movement advocates and community organizers who are going to do the work to protect the people in our community. So I think that this is all sort of still being determined. I have to go because now I'm late for my meeting, but thank you everybody for your attention. Thank you for Anne for organizing this. Thanks for Jen for being my gracious co-panelist. And also to everybody here, because again, the people who are in this Zoom call, you're going to be the ones who are going to be making the difference, right? Not anybody who's got a paid position at the DNC, not one of the, very well compensated Democratic Party strategists and this parasitic overclass of consultants, right? They may have power, money, and influence, but they don't do anything to protect us. All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Bye.
Bye. Jen, should I take the next question? Okay, Mary Ann Peter.
Thank you. I really appreciate this presentation, both of the presentations and the discussion. I do want to focus on the issue of immigrants and what we can do. I have a number of friends who are undocumented, and the level of fear in the community is very high. One particular person came to see me from Flip today, and I think one thing that we could implement pretty quickly is know your rights clinics at the various campuses. So I will be seeing where and how I can do that, but I think it would be great if it was centrally organized and people were trained centrally. And I think that should be happening sooner rather than waiting until January 20th, because just like there are children who were held back from school during the last Trump administration, there will be CUNY students who are afraid to come in, either because they themselves are undocumented or because they're afraid they could be picked up on the street. Some of them at this point are not actually in danger because they're in the process of getting asylum. They have some status already, but they don't know that. So the fear is kind of crippling. People stop going to clinics and so on. So we know that this happens before there are any raids, before we know whether New York City is going to continue to be a sanctuary city or not. And so local organizing is happening in my neighborhood already. And I would love for this to be coordinated with CUNY such that people who get training can go into the different schools and do multiple bilingual trainings. I mean, all we're telling people is these are your legal rights. So this is something that presumably local administrations at the campuses should not fight us on. But if it were centrally located, I mean, negotiated, that would help us to not have to argue it out on each campus separately, creating that kind of panic. Yeah. So I did sign up to do whatever we're doing. And I think these two issues that are being raised are not unrelated, because some of the people who voted for Trump are not people who despise their undocumented neighbors. And, you know, the more we can sort of mount a robust defense, the more we can pull people away from the kind of cruelty that they may have inadvertently voted for. Thank you.
Thank you.
We definitely agree with that and want things to be like, use both the PSC work to train people, to coordinate things, to work as a hub. And we definitely are already kind of going, you know, it's really hard with the contract negotiations are going to wrap up in the next few days, potentially. We are very tired. And then we are going to just switch gears really quickly and move right into this work here centrally. And it is absolutely what we need. And, you know, all the kinds of like work that we want to do, coordinating with other groups, like in my neighborhood, that is, you know, Arab American Association, you know, New York Immigration Coalition, you know, we want to coordinate with not only our CUNY Clear colleagues, but NYCLU. So to really do kind of things more essentially, NYCLU is looking at like, what are the kinds of things, if anything, still for the state legislature to take up, right? I mean, in terms of like some of these kinds of like modifications of these protections. I want to go back to a second ago to Michael Frank's question and others about some of the kinds of like union shifts, in addition to kind of like people staying home and kind of where our union colleagues are. You know, just as a reminder, you know, I went to a Working Families Party national convention several years ago. Right. And I was sitting at a table with like and I went to a union breakfast, and there were people there at my table, breakfast table, from the Teamsters and CWA. And they both said then, right, well prior to even knowing that Trump would be again a candidate at this time, said the majority of their members in their regional, in the Northeast, voted for Trump. And right, that was like the tension for them, right, about some of this like engaged work. So we need to think about this as like, this is not something, right, that is just of this particular year and of this particular cycle, right? I see Michael nodding, right, of that kind of like union shift, but does have to do with these kinds of like tensions, right? And also, you know, I mean, we also talked about that kind of like incumbency question. You know, we may see kind of like incumbency tantrums, right, as we do globally, right, around economic conditions. But we all know, right, how much, just as everyone has said here, how much work there is to do. And exactly, like, why wasn't there a robust minimum wage campaign, right? Like, we have a lot of work to do that we know we can do. And that is really, it's also an exciting opportunity, right? And in addition to being extremely frustrating, right? Also talking.
Jen, before I go to the next question, there are 5 people with their hands up. Can you take those? Or
Yeah,
how?
let's take John, Bonnie, Lorraine, Peter, Nancy.
And
There's
then
also
release-
Cheryl. Cheryl has her hand up.
Okay.
She put it up in the
Who I'm
chat.
delighted to speak with all of them, or
Okay,
have them tell me what's going on.
Very busy. Okay, John, she wants to know what's going on.
I do.
John Highland.
Hi, John Highland.
How you doing? You hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Jen, and in absentia, Susan. I think we need to do this more often. You know, just an aside. I don't want to go forward with politics as usual. And I think we there's a record that we play every 2 or 4 years, and we do it. I think that we need rather than politics as usual, I think we need social movement politics, just as we need social movement labor. And I think there's a couple of examples of that. So it's not just sort of abstract. I forget what years this was in Chicago. Was that, I think it was the 80s or 90s. It was a movement started, a small group, and it gradually got larger. It was led by largely the black community in Chicago. And there was a mayoral election. And instead of looking for a candidate, they built a program. And they looked for a person who would agree with the program and fight for the program. That's different from a popularity contest where you line these people up on the stage and they say a few things and you pick them. No, I don't think that works. So the Harold Washington example, he was a popular congressional, he was a congressman. They interacted with him. He said he would do it. He agreed with the program. He would fight for it. They worked their butt off and they elected Harold Washington. And he went into office with a movement behind him. Different from politics as usual, where we wind up electing, even when we elect somebody, we put our resources in them, they win, then we go to them and we say, pretty please, will you do some of the things that we would like to have done? I'm tired of that, and I don't think it works in our interests. I think in 68, there was movement politics. You had a whole peace movement, right? And it affected. Patty, I'm talking. Jesus. Anyhow, I'll cut it short. There's other people, but I think you get the gist.
Thumbs up. Bonnie Nelson.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on something that Susan Kang said about how there currently is a sort of a fight over the future of the Democratic Party between those who say we should move left and those who say we should move right. And the positions, the policy positions of the left wing, of the progressive wing, are the popular ones. People want, to raise the minimum wage. If you ask the question properly, they want universal single payer health care, and yet it's demonized. They want unions to be strengthened. So this is a, tension right now between people who say, go more progressive and people who say go more moderate. And it seems to me that, what happens in this discussion on the national level is very important for us, whether the party chooses to go one way or the other. Is there any way that we can influence that discussion? We can sit here and talk about it, we can complain, but I feel like it's out of our hands, and the power players are just determining things. Is there anything we can do?
Why don't we just keep going? We'll collect stuff and then we'll just
Jill,
wrap up at the
sure.
end. Yeah.
Lorraine.
Do you have an answer, Jen?
She's gonna answer you. She's gonna answer you. She wants to take a few more questions. Lorraine.
Yes, this builds off of Bonnie's question in a way. As a member of the Social Safety Net Working Group, we are very cognizant that Social Security and Medicare are potential sources of income, of trying to save money, and then lower taxes for the wealthy. It's unclear whether there will be major cuts or major changes, but it seems to me that as a union, we want to know what our representatives at the AFT level and even the AFL-CIO level are doing to get ready for this. And has the PSC leadership been thinking about how to put pressure on, NYSET, which seems a little hopeless because they are very slow, to say the least, and the AFT to take strong stands and organize and mobilize around these issues.
Do you want to take the next, Peter Reynes?
Peter, go ahead. Peter and Nancy, go ahead, and then I'll say I have some notes. Go ahead.
Yes, I apologize now for a question that's more macro, not dealing so much with New York State, New York City, or CUNY. But remember in 2000 that George W. Bush won the electoral vote and lost the popular vote. We know Hillary, same thing in 2016. We know that Trump just squeaked by. He doesn't even have 50% of the vote. So we know that Kamala has almost the support of 50% of Americans. So I don't think we should, push so much that she ran a terrible campaign. I think what she did was as good as she could do. And when she said, I don't disagree with what Biden has done in terms of projects, she was right. What he did in terms of IRA, the infrastructure bill, Biden had a lot on his plate, and he did a very good job, including with the coronavirus situation. So my thing is this, that what we need, and we all know this, the Electoral College we have to get rid of it. If we didn't have the Electoral College, we'd have Democrats continually winning, because the big states overwhelmingly have the popular votes to defeat the many rural small states. So there is, and I guess Jen, you may know this, there is what's called a National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And that's already received the support, I think, of 15 state legislatures. And this is something that we should support. And I think the time has come. We've had such a demobilization of people. And I think this is the way to go.
Okay, so Nancy is going to be the last question, and then we'll tie up.
We have Cheryl also, Cheryl Bluestone.
Cheryl Blue, where is Cheryl in the queue? I don't see her.
She raised her hand in the chat, but is having trouble.
Okay, so Nancy and then Cheryl, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of the presentation, so you may have covered this, and I apologize. I'm thinking that the blue states, and we're living in one, that we really need to push them to have not just a progressive agenda, but to actually be able to do things. I think one of the problems that people felt during the national election is that the Democrats didn't feel the effect of the Democratic legislation, of the government helping them enough. We know that Biden had a fabulous record on many fronts, but it was too little too late, and people didn't experience it. In the states, we have the ability to have a progressive agenda and to deliver for the people, and for the people to experience that with childcare, with education, with environment, with unions, with single payer. I mean, there are a lot of things I think that we could be doing with protection of, sanctuary cities and protection of our immigrants. I think one of the problems with the Democratic Party, besides that they get too much money and too much control from the billionaire class, we know that, but that they're not active enough in giving back to the people. And I think that we can be the troops behind that. If we all commit to some area of work through our union, with our union, I think we can push a line that says we need to be able to produce, to show what the Democrats, what the blue states can do. I know that California is doing much more to batten down the hatches and make sure that their laws are going to be Trump-proof than we have. But, Anthony Delgado wrote, who's the lieutenant governor, you sort of forget, wrote a really good piece, an opinion piece in the Times, basically stating that. And I think we need to articulate that. The blue states have to show their work. We have to be able to, move forward on these things and not go to the right.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Nancy. All right, Cheryl, quickly, wherever you are, you're the last question. Cheryl Bluestone? Okay, I don't know, Jen.
Cheryl, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, Jen, you want to just make a couple of comments and we'll be right on time.
Okay, excellent. I was putting a bunch of links in the chat as folks were talking. Everyone, I thank you. Everyone who just chimed in on that last set of 6 people. I can't agree with folks more here in terms of like the need for us to organize through movements and push through movements and to do this work kind of on the ground and also ways that kind of refract right nationally. I mean, Lorraine, on the AFT is absolutely already thinking about and has already been thinking about kind of in the run-up to the election a defense of Social Security and Medicaid, Medicare. Absolutely, it's true. Randy Weingarten talked about it in the summer at the convention with Harris, right, as the nominee, right, that same day. Like the defense of those things is very much kind of in the minds of not just the AFT, and it was also, as some of you know, that it was it suffused the kind of AFL talking points, right, that people were using in some swing state environments, right? So those are also really important things to see those things on the agenda and for our ability to kind of like push and mobilize around defense of the social safety net doing that nationally through union siblings, like will be like obviously super important. And Lorraine, I think you're absolutely right about that. And our ability to kind of lead and defend around programs that are just right. I mean, just to say like completely vital and and absolutely like so important to defend, like it's hard to even sort of like be able to say right enough about that. I mean, I think Peter is right that we have to not overemphasize the sort of degree to which, even though I started saying like 600,000 people in New York City stayed home, at the end of the day, right, as some national commentator said, like at the end of the day, the results were, if you take 100 people, 2 or 3 people in that 100 changed their minds and changed their votes, right, between Biden and Harris. It is not like a massive sea change. In the end, it is kind of edge work. And then we have to contend with the question of kind of like the enthusiasm gap and how much the economy and inflation played into it then, and then in what ways, right? And the other factors, just as everybody has said across the meeting, right? And as so many folks just said, including, Bonnie and Nancy, like these are the kinds of like opportunities, right, to do this work directly and on the ground, right? I mean, the very work here that Nancy has done through the union and through environmental justice, right, work around like building public power and mobilizing, right? It was a huge, as everyone here knows, right? It was a massive deal when NYSET, right, as Lorraine points out, a real behemoth to move, right? When NYSET supported public power, that signaled something in Albany, right? In terms of a sea change to say, okay, it's time to do this, right? It's time to be committing to public renewables. And like that is something that our union like should be super proud of. But it also, just as Nancy was saying and others were saying, it also does really show like the impact that we can have, right? In just the way, right, that we can do it and that we can continue to press on. I mean, the state legislature is going to be back in regular session, right, January 2nd. And so come that week, right, if they don't want to go back into emergency session, we can be doing all the kinds of mobilizing that we need to for the kinds of things that the NYCLU and others have pointed out, like are changes that we should be making to defend people and to shore up kind of like systems of protection, including the variety of ways, including that states like like New York may become sanctuary like spaces. And sanctuary spaces not only for immigrants, but like trans families, right? Moving from other states, people needing abortion care, right? That is like, it is, if you need an abortion right now in New York City and you live in New York City, guess what? It's hard to get an abortion. Okay, that is the reality right now, December 24, right? It's hard to get an abortion right now because there are not enough abortion providers here. And we are a national center where people travel to come and get abortions already, and already for decades. Okay, so like that is the reality of that. And we're going to have to do like some of that kinds of like basic base building work around like shoring up that kind of infrastructure.
Wow. Ava, I hope you're saving the chat, and maybe Bonnie saving the chat. I can't seem to do it. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
But
I'd love to see the chat. And I really, again, I hope folks will email me if they want. I'm going to put up my email in the chat one more time. If people want to be part of both, this is not going to be also your last time to tell us, but both some of the kinds, both PSC endorsement season work and also immigrant defense work and everything else you want to be doing, please feel free to be in touch with me. I will be more robustly on top of all my email, hopefully in about 72 hours when we have a tentative agreement on the contract.
okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. Good
Really,
to see
I'm
retirees.
taking time to talk with
No,
us.
of course.
Of course. Well, I know I can't imagine, what your plate looks like, but
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you
And
guys.
great presentation, great dialogue.
And by the way, we have proposed to CUNY a standing labor management committee on retiree issues, including pension struggles. And we want them to accept that on our list of labor management committees.
Yes,
Okay.
okay.
All right,
Terrific.
guys. See you later.
All right, go get that contract. Bye, Jen. Cheryl, do you have something to say or ask? I guess not. Okay. Okay, folks, so we're going to transition now to our next two speakers. Michael Foley is the Communications Director. I think that's the right title. And Donna Costa, the Executive Director of the Welfare Fund, are going to talk to us about Medicare Part D, I think. Donna, or who's first? Michael, you go first? Okay.
Thanks, Anna. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. It's great to be back with you. I hope the holiday was wonderful. Before we dive in, I just want to remind everyone, please get your vaccine shots. During the presentation, I'm going to drop into the chat the exact card to use at the pharmacy for all of you. That should clear up any questions. I'll put my phone number in the chat and along with my email. So if you have any questions about your flu shot, your RSV shot, COVID, pneumonia, all the rest of it, we can take care of that today. I'm here today with a special guest, someone most of you know, Donna Costa, the Executive Director of the Fund. Donna has some important updates about your CVS SilverScript prescription drug plan. The SilverScript drug plan is a Medicare Part D based plan, and there's significant changes coming in 2025 that will impact your budgets. Some of you may have already heard about the changes, like a $2,000 cap on out-of-pocket costs, cost increases, and other changes. Some of this is accurate. Other details need to be put into context. That's why Donna is here today to provide a good, transparent explanation of what's happening and what you can expect when you step up to the pharmacy counter. Donna.
Hi, everybody. Donna, before you start, I just have to say before I forget, Donna was a major player in making sure that no matter what happens to our Medicare and our senior care, we will have welfare fund benefits. And everybody should be very grateful for that. Go ahead, Donna.
Oh, thank you for those kind words. And
yes,
I really, your benefits as retirees and the actives are really important to me. And I really do try to put in a good fight to make sure that everybody gets as much as we can get. So thank you, I appreciate. I am here to talk about Medicare Part D changes that are coming, that some of which have happened and some of which are coming up next year, and try to put them in a little bit of light. Anything to do with Medicare Part D, unfortunately, is really not transparent. There's usually a lot of if, ands, or buts that go along with it. I am going to try to keep it on a pretty basic benefit level that I hope answers the questions. But should you have any further questions that I can't answer today, we can certainly have another meeting, and we can go into the weeds if you like. I leave that open to you, but I think it's it'll be much better if I can just give you kind of an overview of what's going on. In light of your last speakers, and about the Trump administration effect, again, that's a caveat that this is what is in place today. What may change at some point next year, I have no idea. I can't even tell you if I think it will, if I think it won't. I have no idea. This is such an odd change in the administration. I don't know what to say from there. I believe you will have it in place for a significant amount of time, but who knows what changes will come. So let me start with going back a little bit to remind you all that in 2012, we went into a Medicare Part D with an EGWIP. The EGWIP was added to a basic Med D plan, and that was because we didn't have the desired level of coverage that we wanted in a basic Med D plan. So we wanted to add better benefits with an EGWIP, which is a wrap. It's kind of like a major medical on a prescription drug plan. Since 2012, a lot has happened. CMS made a lot of changes to their basic plan, enhancing it by lowering members' out-of-pocket costs. The fund's also done our part in lowering member copays by eliminating generic copays in 2021. So any generic drug that you get, you have no copay. And that also means some of the biosimilars and the very expensive generic drugs that cost anywhere from hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars. That's at $0. And that is not a basic, that's not included in the Medicare Basic Part D plan, but one that the fund wanted to add into it. Another significant change came this year when CMS mandated that there would be out-of-pocket costs to members would not be more than about $3,200. And I use the about $3,200 because there's always that if and was it a brand name, a generic? And I don't, like I said, I don't want to confuse this by going into the weeds on that. So at about $3,200 that the member has paid out of their pocket, they would go into a catastrophic stage. Previously, when you passed your catastrophic change, members still had to pay 5%. And that was 5% on some extremely expensive drugs, because people who were in the catastrophic stage were usually on expensive drugs to begin with or were very ill. In 2024, there was $0 copay in the catastrophic stage. That 5% was now picked up by the fund, and that was mandated by CMS. Even bigger news is in January of 2025, the max out-of-pocket copay is now $2,000. That means any member who pays $2,000 copays for drugs pays $0 after that. What's even more important for the welfare fund is that the welfare fund does not impose what will be next year's copay of $590. The welfare fund it has been picking up 80%, which means the members only paid 20%. And again, that's not part of a basic Med D program. It's part of an enhancement the fund put in. But even though the fund pays 80% of that deductible, that still goes in as if the member paid it. So that means your maximum out of pocket for a welfare fund retiree is only $15.90. So that's been lowered even lower than what Medicare Part D CMS has mandated. Now, because of these significant improvements to the retirees' drug coverage, which we agree with and which we think are wonderful, we need to change the EGWIP benefits to reflect the change. What does that mean? That means that instead of having a 20% copay, retirees will now have a 25% copay. That's a 5% increase. What does that mean in dollars to you? It means that if you were to pay your 25% of the $590 deductible, you would be paying an additional $29.50. If you were a member who met the remaining, I think it's $15.90 of deductible, $15.88 of the deductible, and never made it into the catastrophic stage where you saved your 5%, the total increase to you would be $79.38, and that includes the $29.50. The whole idea of changing the copays was to level out the CMS mandated changes and the welfare fund changes that improved our retirees' benefits and equalized them. A lot more, and I don't want to go into the weeds on this either, in 2025, CMS made a lot of changes in how they reimburse the fund, and they shifted those onto the fund. One aspect I'll share with you, it's a little easier to explain, is that anybody who goes into the catastrophic stage, that means anybody who exceeds that $2,000 out of pocket, now the member has $0 copay. This year, the CMS had said, well, we'll reimburse the fund 80% of those costs. But next year, they only reimburse the fund 60% of those costs. So to equalize the benefits to the member and the benefits to the fund, we had to adjust the copays to equalize that, so that everyone was still on an equal footing in the types of benefits, that the level of benefits, drug benefits, that the trustees want to give our retirees, which is still very, very generous. But outwardly, that changing from 20 to 25% looks like a negative change. There's other pieces to this that, again, added to this difference of $79, some of it being that Medicare from year to year increases their out-of-pocket, the deductible. They also increased their initial coverage. So there were many things that went into this change, and I hope that at least gives you a basic understanding of why this change was made and how it actually will affect each and every one of you. I am open to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Donna. With my head, I'm in the weeds already. Yeah, I know that, you're explaining this as best we can. Is it, first place, I want to know again, what is an egg whip? And second, is this going to be in writing anywhere on the welfare fund website so we could go back? Okay. What's an egg whip?
Absolutely. EGWIP it's like a major medical plan. It's called an employer group waiver plan. You have a basic Med D, which in 2012 was really a stripped down version. They had high deductibles. They had The copays were 25%. To get into catastrophic, you had to have an extraordinary spend before you even reach that. And there were 3 different stages. Now they've streamlined it to 2 different stages so that it's easier for members to pass through. And like I said, the biggest change that they made is that nobody will have more than a $2,000 out of pocket. And our members will have less than that because the fund picks up, we'll be picking up 75% of the deductible, which is $590.
Okay, we got some questions. Bonnie?
Yes, I understand, Donna, that you're explaining to us why these changes are happening and the fact that on the national level, Medicare is doing things that means the welfare fund has to respond. Can you very simply say what are the changes we're going to see? So
you'll see a 5% increase in a copay. So
for non-generic drugs, for generic drugs, there's still
nothing. And our formulary, these are all for our formulary. These are all for our formulary drugs. These are all brand name drugs. The drugs that are advertised on TV. That's what these drugs are. So the only thing you'll notice is a 5% increase in a copay that you would have paid on a brand name drug. Most of these brand name drugs, I'm sure you're all well aware, are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars.
Okay, and the most that any individual will have to pay in the course of the year is
$79. I'm sorry, $79.38.
That's the most they'll have to pay in copays?
Oh no, I'm sorry. That's the additional amount that they would have to pay in copays. In copays, it's going to be $15,088.
No, isn't there a limit of $2,000 or something?
Yes, but since the welfare fund pays 75% of the deductible.
I'm talking about an individual. What's the most an individual will have to pay?
That is. See, this is where I'm saying it gets complicated.
15,000 or 2,000?
15,000. Because
so an individual will have to pay $15,000?
I'm sorry, Bonnie, I am so sorry. 1,500.
1,500. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So an individual will be paying 25% of the cost of brand name drugs up to a maximum over the year of $1,500.
About 1,500. It's 15. I have to get the exact number. I think I had 1,588.
Okay, so that seems totally manageable. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, Bonnie. These drug prices for me are just always in thousands. It's too low for me.
No problem, Donna.
So sorry.
Bruce Brown. Asked to unmute.
Thanks for that explanation. I really appreciate it, Donna. And so I understand that the 25% instead of 20 means we get to the 1590 perhaps sooner for those of us who are paying out-of-pocket costs, but there's still that cap. That's great. My major question is really much, much more general than your presentation, and maybe you can't answer. Let me just put it out there. There's a big concern about the Trump administration and this adherence to their Project 2025, which has a lot of goals to make institutional changes. And I'm just wondering if you can give us some idea of the extent to which Medicare is or is not immune to possible governmental changes that they may make that would affect our ability to sustain our Medicare, whether it's Part A or B or C or D or whatever. Do you have any sense of that?
The only sense I would have of that is for the Income Reduction Act, and that was what was put into place, and that's the big thing that Trump has always had. He's always been against. He's always saying he's going to repeal it. He's always saying that he wants to change it. I don't know if he will. I can only tell you things that I have read or have been exposed to at some of the conferences. And that is that a lot of the states use the Income Reduction Act and the insurance, the insurance that they use now for, Mike, what's the I'm sorry, I'm blanking out on what the insurance has in the IRA, that they can go to for New York State insurances, the cap for Medicaid, Medicare. They get a lot of, the IRA established a lot of protocol, a lot of mandates where they put a lot of money into the Medicare and Medicaid. And what the states did is they enrolled their members into that plan. And those states, even though they may have voted red, definitely don't want to give that up. So I don't know. I don't think anybody has any clear vision of where this is going to go. When he was in office last time, Trump did not make those changes. So whether that will still happen now, but he's a lot smarter now. He's a lot, he's put into place a lot of different cabinet people to get him where he wants to go. So I don't know. There are people that are much smarter than me that I'm sure will have a much better idea of where this will go.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Donna. Francis Home, I think it is, Francis.
Yes. Thanks, Donna. I was wondering, the welfare fund pays for most of all of my husband and mine medication. Yet when I get a letter from Social Security, it says I have to pay $13 and change for the Part D of Medicare. Is there a way to opt out of that, or should I just keep it in case I end up on some medication that's astronomical?
You don't have a choice. That's an income related adjustment. I believe that's an IRMA charge. There's an IRMA charge for Medicare Part B, and there's one for Medicare Part D. And the rationale behind that is it's an income based. So depending on if you and your spouse make over, I think it's 80 or 80, I'm not sure if it's 80 or 85,000 to a joint 170,000, you're going to get charged this additional adjustment. And it goes up after that. It goes up from 160 to, I think it goes up to 200. If you make more than 200, the rate goes up. If you make more than 250, the rate goes up. That is completely, and that's part of the Income Reduction Act. But those adjustments are what has funded a lot of the Medicare Part D changes. So it's all intertwined, and that's why I'm saying I'm trying to give you a very high level look at what the changes are, but there's a lot of moving parts in there that account for the dollars that go into the program.
Okay.
Okay.
I understand it. Thanks.
Thank you. Marcia.
Hi. I know this is an asterisk, a footnote, but I just want to point out for the 25th time that part-timers are excluded from all of these benefits. And since there are 12,000 part-timers, not all retired, most of them are probably not, I don't know. I don't know how many retiree members are in this group, but it's a bit shameful that the union is not pushing for some equity for part-timers who worked for a zillion years on lower pay, don't have any medical benefits, zero. So the Union of Social Choice, the Union of Social Equity, the Union of Equity, I don't think is fighting that hard for its adjunct retirees. And
Thank you, Marcia. I don't think that's something that the welfare fund controls, but
no, the welfare doesn't.
It's a political statement question, and you're right.
Somebody just put in the chat too that the city will reimburse you for Med D IRMA. They will not. They will only reimburse from IRMA Medicare Part B. Just a clarification.
Okay, I'll call on Bruce if there's nobody else who has a question.
Yeah, thanks. I just had one more question. I
Go
forgot.
ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you. Just one more question I forgot to ask. For those who have the catastrophic major medical, will they continue to pick up the copay even though it's increased to 25%?
I'm not sure which catastrophic you're talking about. Is it the legacy one? Is it the NICET one? I'm not,
Yes,
there are a number of,
yes, that's the one I'm talking
the
about.
legacy one, the Mercer, the
Yes.
$2 million. They should, yes, there's no reason why they wouldn't.
Good, thank you.
Any more questions? On another
I have a
subject?
little question. If somebody wants to change their coverage, in other words, they're married, they're a part-timer, but they're married or the partner to a full-timer, how do they change their who do they talk to? Do they talk to their HR of the school that they teach at? Do they talk to Mike Foley? Do they talk to someone at CUNY?
No, they talk to HR at their school.
Thank
Because,
you.
and you have to do it during open enrollment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Donna and Michael. You're always welcome to come and talk to us. And we really appreciate what you do for us. And you always, I know both of you try to do the best you possibly can. And the political context is becoming, making that much more difficult. We understand. So I
And
think,
I just wanted to call your attention to the last question in the chat
okay,
from Eileen, if you want to read that.
Eileen, I'm turning 65 in a few months. Who can I call to figure out what I have to do?
Is she's already retired at 65? You can call Mike. Mike, you can pick
Yeah,
up this.
absolutely. The retirement questions can be, this probably isn't the best time to discuss something that's pretty involved. So give me a call tomorrow, Eileen. I just put my number in the chat. I'll go over some of the basic details for you. We have a lot of great information online, and as well as what I can give you over the phone.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, anytime.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions, you can certainly email Mike and we'll try to get them up and put them onto the website so that they're easy access for you.
Okay.
So thank you for your patience. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, all right, that's a thumb. Michael, you gonna stay on? No.
Happy
So,
to. Yep, happy to.
if there are no other questions, I think we're actually going to end early. Is Debbie here? I forgot about Debbie. I released Debbie from her, not obligation, but Debbie usually talks to us about anything new with the lawsuit, but I don't think there's anything new. So it looks like we can adjourn. Motion to adjourn? Diane Mena, second.
Second.
Bruce? Okay, folks. Oh, no, you can't leave until I tell you what's coming up next. We're looking ahead to a January 13th luncheon. Same place, John Jay, but the details have not all been worked out. So hopefully we can do that. And we'll be writing to you about how you register and pay. It's going to be $35, the same as in the summer. And we can accommodate this time 100 people because it was so popular last time. So that's what we have in store for January. I hope it works out. On February 3rd, we will kick off a semester of honoring James Baldwin. It's the 100th centennial of James Baldwin's birth. And we have a very renowned speaker, Dr. Brenda Green of Medgar Evers College. Professor Green is the executive director of the Center for Black Literature and director of the National Black Writers Conference. And her topic will be James Baldwin as writer activist. So that's what we're looking at, February 3rd. So with that, hope to see you at a luncheon. I hope we can pull off the luncheon. Hope to see you in person. Stay healthy, and I'll see you hopefully in January and then again in February. Meeting adjourned.